and I'm your host today for our budget presentation. So thank you all for attending, and I'm sure you're taking a lot of time out of your busy schedules, particularly for those with councils, and we've got a couple of representatives who don't have councillors who have been dealing with induction and budget meetings already. So look, thanks very much for coming on this very busy time. But first of all, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and obviously meeting virtually. We're meeting on so many lands. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to make a warm welcome to our panel today. We've got 4 practitioners to present today. We've got Alan Williams, who's the Manager of Financial Strategy, Acting Manager of Financial Strategy at South Gippsland Shire. We've got Narelle Klein, Director of Finance and Systems at the City of Wodonga. Dennis O'Keefe, the CFO at the City of Port Phillip, and Charles Nganga, Deputy Financial Officer at City of Casey and a FinPro exec member too, and also another councillor with one with no councillors. So look, so hopefully today our panel will enlighten us on their council plan and budget processes, and particularly it's obviously very different this year leading up to with all the restrictions and how it's going to appear next year. And I guess we're talking about in a lot of cases, COVID recovery budgets now. So we've set a bit of a brief for the panel to arrange a number of questions that came from the FinPro exec in terms of things we'd like to cover. So they've got that brief, and I won't touch on what those particular things are, but maybe get right into it. And what we'll leave, more than happy if you put keep your systems on mute. But look, please use the chat box for any questions, and we'll try and open up for the last 15 minutes. After the presentations from the panel with some questions at the end that I'll adjudicate and pass on to the panel. So first of all, we might go over to Alan Williams, our Manager of Financial Strategy at South Gippsland Shire. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Some of the questions, and there was sort of a range of questions put to us when we were asked to present to this, was around reimagining the budget process, and reimagining is, become a very popular term right now. It's certainly been around in many guises for many years, but that's the current terminology, so we're working with that. So we've done a lot of reimagining of our budget process. We've really looked at it in terms of community engagement and an integrated plan with the rest of our business planning. And because we've made such significant changes there for this coming budget cycle, thought we'd take this opportunity to share that with you all. So our budget cycle previously at South Gippsland was quite a long cycle. It was 9 and getting on to 10 months of the year. So one budget was finished, an annual financial report was finished, and we're almost jumping straight into the next budget cycle. This had a lot of problems associated with that. There was certainly, the biggest of problems was the lack of engagement with the managers, trying to get them in September and October to be thinking about what was going to start happening next July was something that didn't sort of engage them very well. If they responded, it was a half-hearted response, and it just dragged out forever. What that kind of meant was that lack of engagement in the process along the way for the internal budget holders really meant that what the information they were giving early in the cycle wasn't that well thought through, wasn't that well committed. And what we would actually find is a lot of last minute changes, a lot of things rushed through at the end because they hadn't thought about their budget for some 6 months before things were then being finalised. They were being asked to commit to those changes and then realising that they hadn't perhaps done the work on them that they should be. And so we actually ended up with a very crammed and rushed cycle of preparing the budget to try and meet the community consultation period with a very uncommitted group of budget holders. That process had been driven out by councils who wanted, I guess, increasing involvement in the budget, wanting to get more and more operational in their detail, wanted to be more engaged at more points along the way. That tended to drag it out with the council meeting schedule that they would then be looking for budget updates almost all the way through the year. And that kept extending the budget process to the point where it had become quite ridiculous. So, and what we're also finding was, I guess, a change that the budget was driving everything else. So rather than looking at what was needed in community plans, in infrastructure plans, in service plans, and then looking at how to achieve that in the budget, things were being driven in reverse. Things were being driven by a budget, then sort of saying, well, how are you going to spend it? Rather than what is needed and how do we financially achieve that? So when we were asked to reimagine the budget process, to use that terminology, we came up with a very different process. So I'll just share my screen to kind of show you what we have come up with. If someone could just let me know if they can see that now.
It's coming up. Yes, that's up, Alan.
Excellent. The technology works. Gotta love it. So we now have a very different process. So right in the middle of the screen here, you'll see a period across February from late Jan into March, a 6-week period there that's going to be our budget planning cycle for our budget holders. That's the main guts of the work that we're going to do in developing the budget. We're going to set up beforehand for information to be with budget holders before that with some budget prep. And that's going to be committed to our executive leadership team by the end of March. So a much shortened period, but preceded by a proper organisational and business planning cycle. So during what's happening currently is a series of workshops with our management team around what are they going to do in the coming financial year. And out of that, they're now starting to work through what's going to be their labour requirements, their material requirements, their capital requirements, contracts, grants, all those kinds of things. But it's being driven by those tactile and things that actually need to happen. And then we'll do the budget process to see what and how we achieve that. So it's really putting the horse before the cart where it should be. It's really doing the what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, ahead of how are we going to financially accommodate that. So that work's going on at the moment. A big part of that for South Gippsland is some blueprint work that in particular our infrastructure team are doing. These community blueprints are conveying to the community, what are we going to do with parks and gardens, with buildings and infrastructure? What's going to be the priority on roads and gateway properties and the like? So all of that work is happening now. So community engagement has started now. Council is involved in those plans. All that's happening now, but it's not being driven from a budget perspective. It's being driven by an infrastructure and services perspective, as it should. So then our budget process is going to be much shortened. We're expecting the engagement with the budget holders is going to be much improved because we'll only need their attention for a short time. We're setting them up now with the reports and information they need to start thinking about ahead of that cycle. So we're doing reports on comparisons of previous budgets, their budget accuracy, so they can really try and tighten their budgets now, and getting all that information in their hands to be thinking about. But not asking them to commit to it until they've done that other work around preparing what are they going to do in the next financial year. And then we're built on the right-hand end of that cycle through April, May and June, the community engagement with the budget itself, according to the new Section 55 out of LGA 2020 and the cycle needed there. So this is very different for us. It's a big change in thinking for our financial team. One of the things is it gives the financial team some time off thinking about just the budget process. So we've got last year's budget and last year's annual report out of the way, but we've got some time to work on other projects where we're not trying to balance, the coming budget work in that. We can focus on other projects and get the team oriented to some other things, get their concentration and time into those, and we'll get to the budget in the coming calendar year for preparation by the end of the financial year. We've got it planned, got it set aside, but we can now focus our thinking on other things. So it helps our finance team, helps our managers be far more engaged when they're actually asked to prepare their budget content and commit to those things, not have changes flowing into the May-June period as they've happened in the past. the community engagement is going to be on the things the community are interested in most, not driven by budget, by driven on the goods and services that they need. And then coming out of that, they can get into the budget cycle in that expected budget time in the April through June period. So this will be very different for us. There's a lot of people really happy about this. There's a lot of people actually very uncomfortable with this, thinking, how do we go from 9 months to 6 weeks? Some people are anxious about that. It's going to take a lot of commitment from our management and from our leadership to support this cycle, make sure our managers are very focused through that sort of key 6-week period, and that we do get that spell working from concept to completion and committed by that mid-March period. So it's a radical change, but I think it's a very good one. It really puts the priorities where they should be. Council and community are engaged through the actual stuff, not through the dollars, but they can also get to that later on in the appropriate time for that. So this is a very different project for us, a very different change for the entire management team, but we think is going to be a very beneficial one for us. Happy to take questions and things from there.
Helps if the convener goes off mute. Alan, I've got a question for him. It's a minute to go, so we might save questions from the audience until the end. But a question for you: in that process, you've made a decision, obviously, on that matrix not to do your LTFP consultation until later on.
We do that periodically anyway. So long-term financial plans presented quarterly to council and the exec team. So they're being regularly updated on that. So we're already presenting that with options around what might happen if there are rate cap changes and other options. So we're considering that.
And the published, and have you published a LTFP before, or is it this will be the first time next year?
This will be the first time next year.
Okay.
We do a very high level one annually.
Yep.
Yeah, it'll be more detailed in this year coming.
And there is a question there from Shane Buckley. I might just ask you while we've got a minute. Was this change driven by the CEO/executive?
It was, I guess, a combination. I'd been looking to do this anyway, and the CEO was very supportive of it, realising that the old process wasn't very good. I'd been working on a different process, so the two kind of came together at the same time.
Good on you. Thanks, Alan. We'll just hold off there because we'll keep moving on. And I might hand over to Narelle Klein. Narelle's the Director of Finance Assistance at the City of Wodonga. Thanks, Narelle. Just turn off mute.
Morning. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, I joined Wodonga Council back in 2015 as Manager Finance and then took on the Director role in 2018. And one of the first things I saw when I came in, we had some good practices around our budget, but they weren't talking to each other enough. And I just felt we needed a bit more evidence around what was going into our budgets, particularly our capital budget. When I started as Director, we had our Ombudsman's report on our waste levy. So that was one of the challenges we had to address. So in that 2018-19 budget, we raised rates by the cap, but we reduced waste charges. So it was a zero net rate rise, effectively, rates and charges for our community. In the 2019-20 budget, we did the same thing. So we also had, we raised the rates by the cap, but we reduced the waste levy so that they actually got a reduction overall in the 19-20 year. And then when we've pulled our 2020-21 budget together with the impact of bushfire and COVID, we've gone with a zero rate rise again. So we've not had a rate rise, we've actually had a rate reduction over the last 3 years. We have been doing 10-year financial plans, and we have been including those in our strategic resource plan. So that has been going public, but they've predominantly been calculated on a consolidated budget at year one. And we've used assumptions, fairly conservative assumptions, to extrapolate that out over a 10-year budget. What we're trying to do at the moment is actually incorporate in our service planning to make that 10-year budget more robust. So instead of having a consolidated starting point, we're actually looking at each service and having a 10-year budget at service level and using that to drive the development of our 10-year financial plan. So it's a bit more accurate and takes into account some of the emerging issues that we know about that are going to impact on the budget in future years. How we've managed to have a zero or a negative rate rise over 3 years, it's really hit our capital budget. So our ability to deliver actions coming out of some of our strategies and plans that involve capital projects has been severely impacted. It's also impacted on our operating budgets, our ability to be prepared for grant opportunities and having shovel-ready projects. We've had to cut and slash our consultancy budget was another area that was heavily impacted. So we don't have as many shovel-ready projects to be agile to respond to some of the grant opportunities at the moment as what we normally would have. And then in this last year's budget, because there was nothing left to cut after 2 years, we actually had to start cutting services. So we've got our Bongilla Migrant Centre was one of the services impacted in the last year's budget, and they've gone from operating 7 days a week to 3 days a week, and a few other smaller issues impacting on our events budget as well. So, it does have a big impact, and I think my message to councils when they're working under a rate cap, and particularly when their communities are suffering financially from the current circumstances, is we need to be conservative with those 10-year budgets. The more conservative you are, the nicer the surprise will be when you actually get to the next year to do the budget, and you might actually have a bit more up your sleeve than you thought you would. And that's enabled us to keep going and having opportunities to get some of the grants that are coming through now. We're conservative with what we think our supplementary rates will be, some of those sorts of things. We don't include any revenue that we feel we are not guaranteed of getting in our forecasts. So things like non-recurrent grants. If we know we've got grants for projects that might go over 2 or 3 years, we include those in because we've actually received and signed up to those grants. We don't include any other non-recurrent grants throughout the 10 years. So we're effectively putting in what we think our contribution will be, particularly in those out years. Say if we're due to put in a new preschool facility in one of our new emerging communities, we'll put what we think our share is at that point in time, and we work towards having that shovel ready and ready to go, applying for grant funding to enable us to build that. And I think you can have some flexibility in that, year 5 to year 10, you've got the ability to be reasonably flexible because it's a long way out, things change and things can change quite substantially. So they are effectively a place marker. One of the other things that we're trying to do, we started our service planning back in 2018. We had CT management come in and assist us to do our first year worth of service planning. And since we've done that, we've purchased a license to their CT management SCEM model to enable us to run our own service planning going forward. So tying in those service plans, our capital budget, from what I can see, what we're doing with our 10-year capital budget is going to be the majority of what makes up our asset plan under the new Act. We need to just incorporate in some more information around our maintenance requirements on those infrastructure assets. But we've got a 10-year capital plan that's factored in all of our renewals based on renewal modelling and condition assessments. Wodonga's in a really good position with our renewals. When we get a brand new council in, the first thing we do to them is drum into them that you have to maintain the existing assets that you have. That in a rate capped environment, if you don't keep up, you will never catch up. So that's been well received by most of our councillors. I think they've only questioned once, could we cut back on our renewals? And I did some modelling for them and they decided not to go ahead with it. So we're up to date pretty well. I think the infrastructure assets that we have here that are over the intervention level are pretty much within the next 12 months renewals program. So the city's looking great, but that's something that you really need to train your councillors around, is you must fully fund your renewals budget or you will never, ever catch up. And then that's really important for developing that asset plan, and the rest of your budget is that's the first thing that goes in and has to be covered. With our, you know, and again, it needs to tie back to your council vision and all of your strategies and plans. So when I first started, there was no real way of tying in those strategies and plan actions into our capital budget. So we're doing that now. We're looking to move, and I know there's some other metro councils that have done this. We're trying to create ourselves a pipeline of all of those actions from those strategies that we've got in place, so that we can start prioritising and having a little bit more of a robust system of bringing forward the prioritised capital projects that we need to put in, and that they're all tied back to existing strategies and plans. And I think that's the main message that I wanted to get across, was try and tie all your plans in together. I think it's really important, and going forward, it just makes your budget process more robust. I hear what you know, the issues were with, you know, councillors trying to get operational. You know, we present them with an overview of our budget, and we do workshops with them, but we try and keep them thinking more strategically. So I give them a snapshot in a report that goes through all of the things that we've done to put in place our first cut of the draft budget that we present to them. And we'll do, depending on the councillors and how long they've been in place, we might do 4 workshops in year 1, but it might only be 3 or 2 workshops down the track when they start getting their head around what's in the budget and what's in their plans. But that overview document just gives them all of the information they need to know to see how we've pulled the budget together, and then they've got their ability to then look at it. There's not much that they can play with once we get that there. It does come down to now, because of those 3 years without rate rises, that any spending that they want to make means that we've got to spend less somewhere else. So yeah, and that's the dilemma that they're faced with. We've got no scope at the moment. Hopefully through some conservative budgeting, we'll start to build up a little bit up our sleeve. But you know, it has been challenging, and the more we integrate all of those documents in together, the more it's enabled us to actually manage getting through, and certainly over the 10 years we'll get back on track.
That's great, Narelle. That's a good insight into that strategic planning. I've got a heap of questions I can ask you of that, and I know that Wodonga, people will be looking at the Wodonga experience, particularly because you've had 3 years of rate freezes. I know this year we've got, I think, is it 15 councils that went for 0 rate increases, which has a massive impact, a cumulative effect on their rate revenues. So I think they'll be all looking, or might be even having a closer look at Wodonga to see how you guys have fared. Thanks for that. And I'm sure there's a few questions will be coming out of that. And I've got a couple of questions about long-term planning, renewal, upgrade and expansion I'd like to ask later too. But we might hand over now to Dennis O'Keefe from CFO at City of Port Phillip, who's going to give us a different view, or another view on budgeting and strategic planning processes. Over to you, Dennis.
Thanks, Danny, and good morning, everyone. I joined City of Port Phillip as CFO in January 2017, and this is my first local government gig. So the training wheels are off at this stage, but it has been a learning experience to me after my previous roles in the corporate world and in state government. Just some context around the City of Port Phillip. Total budget, revenue budget of about $230 million. So we are one of the larger inner metro councils. We have $3.6 billion worth of assets that we either manage on behalf of state government or that we actually own. So the flavour of both Narelle and Alan talking around asset management plans, etc., and renewals and upgrades, that's a key part for the City of Port Phillip. Now, I was quite fortunate when I arrived in January 2017, the City of Port Phillip had already decided to go to, with the new council that was elected in November 2016, had decided to jump into a fully integrated council plan and budget as a document It was the first time that they were going to do it. We've done it now. It was adopted in June 2017. It's been basically the key document in the organisation. Obviously, we upgrade it each year based on the financial landscape, etc. A new budget, obviously, and then we have a 10-year financial outlook that is included as part of that integrated council plan and budget every year. So that's a discipline that we've been used to now for some number of years. So the changes in the new Local Government Act haven't come as a huge issue for us or a shock to us from a perspective of, we were kind of from a maturity perspective, we were moving along that spectrum to increase maturity in producing that type of document for the community anyway. And those documents have been published every year. So the key issue for us in the 10-year financial outlook, though, is that like a number of other councils, we had a significant big future-looking issue dropped on us back in 2013 when the state government that it was then came up with the Fisherman's Bend urban renewal area. That basically came out of left field. And so we've had to make some fairly big, hairy kind of forecasts around what that means for us over the next 10, 15, 20 years. COVID has probably helped us a little bit, and I know it's created significant drama for many in the community, but it has provided us with a little bit of leeway with respect to the slowdown in development, etc., particularly in Fisherman's Bend, so that we can take a little bit of breather as we project what our next financial year, etc., looks like. The 2021 budget, you know, I'm not telling you anything new here. It's been a challenge for all of us. We had a budget ready to drop, draft budget in middle of March, like most of you, that had to be recast. And we were quite happy to get the extra 2 months from the Minister for Local Government to enable us to deliver that and get it adopted by the end of August. We're probably somewhat fortunate. I know some of you on this call are from smaller councils where resources, particularly in the finance area, can be pretty lean. The budget and council plan process at City Port Phillip does have the benefit of having really 3 areas that support the process. Finance, as you would expect, predominantly from the budgeting angle, but also our organisational performance team who have really accountability for the council plan document, and also our governance colleagues. So we have those 3 core areas of the business that really work well together to work on the council plan, to engage obviously with the councillors, executive councillors and the community to deliver what is a document that we're all fairly proud of. And I must admit, I've had a lot to do with strategic documents in my previous lives in the corporate world, and local government does this pretty well. And I know, notwithstanding the resource issues that some of us will have in responding to the local government changes, we have the track record of producing really good quality visions, council plans and budgets. This is really just challenging us to put them all together into hopefully a fairly concise document that the community can understand, and also we can be held accountable to as officers, but also as a council as well. Obviously, as CFO, I'm a key player in driving this whole process along. I do acknowledge the great help I get from the other managers who work with me from those areas I talked about. I was asked to think about the 3 key challenges that I see coming up in this budget process that we're about to jump into for 21-22. COVID, I mean, we can't ignore it. Most of us have spent the last 6 months struggling to fix revenue holes that we have in our budgets to deal with a very shattered and distraught community. So it's not going to go away. At City Port Phillip, we had 3. We've seen 3 distinct phases. We've seen that initial response to the community from March to June, July, August. We now see ourselves in a recovery stage where it's our job, we believe, to help the community recover both our residential ratepayers and residents, but also the businesses that we rely on in our city. So we see 3 key areas in the next budget that are going to still have a COVID kind of flavour to them. And that's obviously our revenue, our costs and our CapEx. Just to give you an idea from revenue, and in the good days, we make a lot of money out of parking fees and infringements. The Ombudsman has probably shared some of her views on that and how we've managed that over the last, in the past, well before my time at council, I should say. But we've seen $35 to $40 million of revenue from those streams be impacted by up to $9 to $10 million. A lot of those parking revenue streams fund a lot of the, what some people would call discretionary expenditure that we do as a council, the progressive type of stuff that we do to support vulnerable people in the community. That predominantly comes out of that revenue stream. So for us to take that hit has been quite traumatic. And we will be dealing with that through the next budget year, 21-22 as well. It's also had an impact on our capital portfolio. And Narelle talked about the impact of 3 years of 0 rate increases on Wodonga's capital portfolio. So that has been an issue. We've deferred where we can capital expenditure. We're going to have to think very hardly about, strongly about that in 21-22 budget, because some of our indicators around our, replacement of asset levels, etc., and percentages, they need to be really addressed. We've got a new council, and we're one of the councils who don't have a waste charge. Our waste costs, like many of yours, are increasing 5 to 6% a year. The rates are increasing maximum 2% a year. That's a jam for us. We're going to have to talk quite seriously to our council and the community around introducing a waste and amenity levy. That will be challenging. I don't think we'll get it across the line maybe in 21-22 budget. It could be the following year. The other big curveball is we go live on Monday, next Monday, with the enterprise budgeting module of Technology One's One Council Cloud solution. We're going through the full ERP implementation at the moment. We went live in July on most of the finance modules. We go live next Monday, touch wood. I can't see any wood here, I'll just have to touch my head, on EB and also on project lifecycle management. So this is a new technology platform that will challenge the organisation. Look, it's great. I've done the end-to-end stuff. They've actually let me near it, which is quite unusual. I tend to be a jinx when it comes to technology. I think I can use it, and if I can use it as CFO, that should bring confidence to the rest of the organisation. What will look different next year? The reality of the council elections. We have 9 councillors. 4 of them have what you would consider a progressive, social progressive leaning view. 4 of them have a very fiscally conservative leaning view. And we have a new councillor, an independent, who is going to be playing a key role, I would think, in how we move forward. The new technology I just talked about, that will be challenging for the organisation, but I think the longer term benefits, what I've seen so far with regard to be able to use a lot of preloaded templates across all the key budget inputs, it will be a godsend for us in the long term. And we have an organisation with a change structure as regard, because of the COVID response. We went from 5 GMs in August down to 4. We've consolidated a lot of departments and teams, so that will have an impact. I was asked about success. What would I see this year a budget success for us?
1 minute, Dennis.
Excellent, thanks, Danny. Adopting the budget in mid-June, I think for all of us in finance, that's the key success factor. We don't want anything going pear-shaped on the 23rd of June when we're standing naked there in front of the community with a budget about to hopefully get approved. The next 4-year council plan adopted by councillors, that's critical, particularly where we have a council with the mix that we have at the moment. Clarity on the waste discussion. If we don't get a waste levy up this year, we need to have some clarity about how we can feed it into our longer term financial sustainability. And revenue rating strategy. We all have to deliver one of those. We're still waiting for the review of the state government on the rating system. We might do a light touch review this year to meet the legislative requirement, but really we're one of the last councils on NAV, and we think this rates review by the state government will have an impact on the 5 of us councils that are still doing NAV. So they're the key things I see as my main topical issues as a CFO heading into the next budget year. So thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Dennis. Yes, good you touched on the rating review. Of course, we're all waiting on the rating provisions of the new Act, so that's going to be very interesting because I know we've got this a lot of issues around cult wreck land. Particularly, I'm not sure what we're going to see out of that, but we're certainly well overdue to hear the results of that. So that'll be interesting to see over the next month or so. Thanks, Dennis. Now over to Charles. I think Charles was in and out on the internet. I think he's back with us. So Charles, if you turn on your mic and start talking, we'll see if we've got you.
All right. Thanks, Danny, and welcome to you all. I have a presentation, so let's see.
Yes, that's come up.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much. So thank you and welcome to you all as, on behalf of FinPro. My name is Charles Nyanga. I'm the Deputy CFO at City of Casey. Been there since 2016 and previously I've worked all over the world. So this has been quite an interesting gig. Now, in terms of the key messages and the information I'll be sharing, it's gotta say, been an interesting year. If your conditions haven't changed considerably in the last 12 months, you've not been living on this planet. Things are just completely different. So for us, we've seen a fair bit of that. In terms of capital works program, we are working towards prioritizing capital works. As Narelle said, you need to make sure that your capital works or your assets are consistently upgraded and renewed just to keep up. And in terms of how the budgets are being done this budget season, it's not business as usual. You need, now, we've been talking about it, but now we need to find savings and also find other funding sources and efficiencies across the board. I know out there are people who are not financially astute, and they don't like numbers. So I try to use pictures when I do the budgets, and now let's see if this is going to work. So what I try to do is I try using the world record line. So if you've ever heard of Ian Thorpe, Grant Hackett, and all that kind of stuff, they'd be on what you'd call that yellow line. You want your budgets when they're done, your 2021, 2022 budgets at the end of the year, you want people to be as close as possible to that line. However, if you're talking about revenues, you want them to be ahead of that line. If you're talking about expenditure, you want them to be behind that line. So that is something that I usually show to the budget holders to show them that's what we're looking for. The fact that they came in under and in terms of expenses, I'm not going to be too happy about that because that meant that I took funds away from another department which could have used those funds going forward. Now, next. Things to consider in terms of what we need to consider is we now need to consider how by what magnitude our expenses are going to grow by. You can't just say we're going to grow by 5%, yet we get a 2% rate cap, and this year we might not even get anything. Are there any other available sources of funding? Get more grants, more other funding revenues. What can we stop? Misaligned services and service delivery models, inefficient and outdated delivery models. We need to start looking at those. We also need to start looking at setting out our contracts, conditions, requirements. It's not, we shouldn't, if, for example, the grass cutting contract, should we cut it twice a week, once a week, twice a month, or even just once a month, just in terms of the value that we are going to add to the community. I think Narelle did mention that Wodonga has been having 0% rate cap or rate rise. That's been very, very painful. And I think that came up very clearly when FinPro did an exercise to show what the impact would be on a council if they did not pick up the rate cap. So if you did not pick up a rate cap in your shire, or your council usually collects $20 million worth of rates. That's $5 million over 10 years. 50, that's $10 million over 10 years. That's, if it's 100 million, you're talking about $25 million over 10 years. So City of Casey has a rate base of, we collect almost 250 million. So we're talking about losing close to 52 between $52 and $60 million over 10 years if we do not pick up, if we say we're going to pick up a 0 as our rate increase. So that's very, very challenging. Below is just something just to show how, the state, or maybe the state, comes up with the rate cap. And as you can see, based on what we got, which was last year was 2%, and what has actually been happening, the likelihood of a rate cap this year having a 1 or even have a 0 before it is a higher likelihood. So that is something that we now need to consider. And though that's what I talk to when we talk to the administrators, when we talk to our department heads, and when we talk to budget holders, that it's not business as usual. You can't just be putting in budget increases just as you used to do before. Our budget is based on financial sustainability principles, and the City of KC, from my understanding and from discussing with everybody, we will operate within the rate cap set by the state. Look, we have special ratepayers in our state. Our ratepayers want to pay lower rates and they want to get better services. So we are trying to square that circle. Just as I said before, priority is currently being given to capital works, particularly renewals and upgrades. So, making sure that the assets that we have, and we have a $5 billion asset base, we're constantly making sure that those assets we keep up with how they're deteriorating. And in terms of operational expenditure and growth, you require, just before you get any increases, you're required to show why you should get that budget increase, and you also need to show that you have efficiencies to support your growth. We are focusing a big time on business improvements, innovation, and cost savings, so that we can maintain and improve at the same time the service delivery standards. I think somebody also mentioned this is something that we are working on, strategic workforce planning to guide decisions going forward, and basically focusing on business transformation and service and demand in service, in growth in service demands. The major financial challenges for the City of KC, and I believe the local government industry, is obviously one of them. For us, if you have a swimming pool or a gym, it's very hard to run that business when the government says your main customers stay home. So we have been impacted very, very, very severely in our leisure centers, and that impact will be continuing for a while, because we sent our customers home. So now and you understand the way the gyms work, you now need people to sign up, and that's going to take a while, and we're still limited in terms of who can actually be there.
1 minute, Charles.
1 minute. All right. So so the other stuff is obviously untied revenue, and we have an EBA coming up, so that's also a very big challenge. We don't know what we're going to have coming up. And then this is the timeline process. So November, we kicked off the budget process. It closes off in December. We then have meetings with ELT. And then in March, we then have your deliberative engagement on the budget, and we kick off the business planning. So that is it in a nutshell. And I will take questions with the rest of the team. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thanks, Charles. That's great. Can you just just take off the presentation? Thank you. Well done. Hey, we've got a few questions, and I might open up to the whole panel. I know the first one actually came up when Narelle was talking, so if Narelle wants to answer this one, but I think we'll keep them open to all the panel to answer some of these. And the first one's from Nusi Magdalena. How conservative are you in your cash flow? Do you also build conservativeness in your cash receipt, e.g., not all cash income is receipt and cash expense?
Look, I can have a quick start with that one. So some of the things, particularly with our 10-year budget that we're looking at, things like employee expenses, our enterprise agreement had a 2% wage rise in our in the agreement, but the amount that I actually increased our employee expenses by across the 10 years was 3%. That 3% covers things like banding increments, so where people within each banding, there's 2 or 3 different pay rates to allow for less experienced people to build their skill set up over a period of time. There could be some additional like positions brought into council. We've been very conservative with our employee numbers. They've not increased our EFT for about 10 years. We're at that point now where we've just got too much work for the resources we've got. So we are expanding some new employee numbers, but that 3% is covering all those extra things. It also covers your workers' compensation insurance. So, you know, how are those premiums tracking? So it's building those sorts of things into your assumptions with your materials and suppliers. If your CPI rates running around the 2% or thereabouts, you know, but what are the price increases you're getting from your suppliers? We're not necessarily aligned to what that CPI rate is. So I probably use a 4% or a 5% factor when I'm working out what my expenses are going to rise over the 10 years. So there's some of the conservative things like your supplementary rates. If you've always had, you know, X as your supplementary rates over the last few years, there's always that potential, and certainly in the current circumstances now, that there could be a downturn on what's happening in that area going forward. So we've actually had, you know, quite conservative numbers going forward that don't match what we've had actuals for the last few years. And certainly we redid all of our assumptions in that COVID environment, and some of the numbers that we had in there, like I've got a 1% CPI in there on our rates for our rate cap for the first few years, and then gradually increasing it out from sort of year 5 onwards. So it's utilising those things that you've got to be conservative, so that if things don't sort of pick up quickly, that you're covered in your budget. If they do pick up quickly, then that's a bonus. You can fix that up in the next year's budget. And when you're looking at 10 years, you know, you've got opportunities. Those years, particularly even years 4 to 10, they're a long way out. So, you know, you can, if you get something not quite right in those years, you can fix it up when you do the next year's budget. So hopefully that addresses some of the conservative. On the cash flow side of things, we've not had real issues with our cash flow before. So we maintain a certain level of debtors, rates and sundry debtors. This year we are going to have to, and we did factor in a little bit of a delay in the current circumstances, and we'll revisit that again this year. And I think we'll actually factor in some bigger delays, because I know we've got many businesses out there that are struggling with their cash flow, and we're allowing people to go on repayment arrangements or deferring rates to the end of the year, so we can get a better idea of, you know, if we've got a limited budget to provide rate relief, where do we target that best? So, yeah, there's some of the things that we're looking at in that space.
Thanks, Narelle. Anyone else make a comment, or I can go to the next question? We might go to the next one. I'll pass over your comment, Alan. I think we've all contributed to the City of Port Phillip's coffers at some stage in terms of parking revenues. The next one is from Liz Collins. Are some councils planning to undertake deliberative engagement pre-finalising the draft budget rather than after the initial draft budget has been developed? We were planning to go to the community in January, Feb to enable feedback and input from the community to be considered in the final draft budget. That's interesting, because I know, I think, Alan, you showed on your metrics that you're doing some similar 223 type consultation with the current budget, but didn't talk about deliberative. So what's some thoughts on that, on the deliberative consultation?
I guess it's an interpretation of what deliberative consultation means. Certainly the community blueprint sessions we talked about are a deliberative process of engagement. As I said, we're putting the stuff ahead of the dollars, I guess. We're sort of saying these are the drivers of what we want to do in our community change. We've got what's called a community first initiative that we're undertaking. And those things are putting our engagement with the community on our services, our infrastructure, our forward planning, and then we'll engage in another mode on the actual finances and the budget itself later on.
Yeah, look, I might add to that a little bit with what we're looking at. Now, I've always, all the way along, I thought that we had the consultation on the budget the wrong way around, like doing the consultation at the end when you've drafted the budget. It's too late to, you go through your submission process, but it's done and dusted. Like, it's very difficult to make changes to your budget at that point in time, and not very much, only some token projects and things would get through. We should be going out to the community first, so they feel like they're heard. It doesn't guarantee that what they say is going to make it into the budget, but you go through a process early on. And with this year, we've got to do deliberative engagement on our council plans as well. So, I mean, you can only go out to your community so many times. So that deliberative engagement on the council plan needs to cover your budget too. They go hand in hand, because your budget's going to deliver that council plan. So I think we need to sort of change how we think, and certainly here at Wodonga, what we've looked at for next year, we're a little bit too late this year, is once we've adopted the budget in June, pretty much from July onwards, community members should feel like they can put requests into the council for the next year's budget. So, opening it up, we're doing some community forums 4 times a year with the community. So actually putting it on that agenda for the one in that first quarter of the financial year to say, what are your aspirations for our budget for next year? Talk to us now, send some stuff into us now, and we can take that into account when we're pulling the budget together, because it's kind of a little bit late to make wholesale changes once you've already spent all of those months pulling it all together, and then you get right to the end of the financial year and you've only got a certain amount of time to adopt your budget. You might get some really good suggestions that had been overlooked, but you just can't respond on them. It's got to wait until the next financial year. So I like the idea of let's talk to the community first before we've actually finalised that draft budget.
Thanks, Narelle. Thanks, Alan. Laura Bettles has made a comment there about Mornington Peninsula. Have a pre-budget submission process, and community members were able to make submissions during November, and we held the forward planning hearing last night. Then we try to include items that councillors support in the draft budget. Luke Wheeler, this is for you, Charles. Absolutely love the use of world record line. Financial literacy is always an issue. I'm definitely going to use that. And Charles, probably another one for you, and maybe everyone else can have a comment. What will the DE look like for Casey? So what's the DE? Is that
deliberative? I was actually asking the same thing. Yes. So along the same lines with Narelle, we have kicked off a process early on in the last in November. We've gone out to the community, and as Narelle says, I think one of the things that we've been trying to make sure we're also going to go out again in March once we put out the budget. But one of the things that we've got to also make sure is we've got to make sure that the community understands or feels that they've been heard. So yes, we're not going to get, not everything they want is going to get in the budget, but it's how we actually engage with them and listen to what they have. Look, we only have limited resources, and I know when Casey's saying that, and there are people rolling their eyes, but unlike previous years, things are different this year. So we are quite challenged in terms of the capital works we can actually do, in terms of the operations that we can actually do, because we have been quite constrained in terms of both our revenue and our capital. So it's actually going out there and listening to the community, and the comms team have been rolling that out as we go along. And it's also been quite difficult because unlike previous years where you could actually go to markets or go to parts of the city and actually engage the people physically, now we've actually had to do it online or offline and get that information.
Next question's from Dennis Batts. Asset renewal is critical. Are councils considering borrowing given low interest rates whilst maintaining strong financial ratios?
I'll start off on that one. The challenge is with loans, yes, the rates are low, but understand that you will have to pay back. So if you don't have a plan of how you're going to pay off that loan, and that's not going to work out very well in the back end. So we in our plans, we only plan to borrow for major capital works, and for which we have been planning to do, all along. So that's how we actually look at it. We plan way ahead. It has to be part of the LTFP. We usually do a 10-year LTFP, and we only borrow for long-term major projects. I know rates are good, but we don't borrow for OPEX because you will have to pay back.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yes.
Also add to that, and absolutely, never borrow for operating expenses, never borrow for your asset renewals. You must be able to fund those from your regular revenue stream without borrowings. If you need to catch up on past asset renewals that you are behind on, you might be able to look at doing some borrowings for that. You probably would need to combine it with a rate cap variation to be able to make sure that you can provide for the repayments. But that's probably the only way you can catch up when you're in a rate cap environment. But absolutely, for your ongoing budgeting, never ever use borrowings for your renewals and your operating. They have to be funded from your revenue and not from borrowing.
Mark's got a question. Hi, Danny. We haven't got clear instruction about revenue and rating plan yet. How do panel members work on it in the context of budget planning and prep?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in there and just give a quick heads up on how we at City Port Phillip are about to jump into that. We're looking at basically splitting it into two. So, rates effectively is going to be very much dependent on if we do get to see what the state government kind of review of the system is, and also what the percentage that they land on in late December for the rate cap increase. And then, we're looking more at the revenue by going down line item by line item through our user fees and charges. And pretty much we tend to go with CPI plus a 25 basis point increase is typically where we land each year, unless the review shows that we're uncompetitive on some of the charges. And we do quite a bit of benchmarking against particularly our other inner city metro councils when it comes to the services that we deliver and the fees and charges that we would charge for them.
I think.
Thanks, Alan. Got another one from Mark McMillan. And excuse me, I'm actually on a borrowed PC. This is my third device to get working this morning. From Mark McMillan, we need to fund loan repayments. Do councils fund this from operating surplus or use capital funds?
You must be able to fund your loan borrowings from your from your cash. You can't borrow to, and I'm not quite sure where with your capital funds, like either you've got grants or we fund our capital from our surplus and from our, the depreciation charge that helps pay for our renewals.
Sorry, I'll jump in with my question. That is actually because we currently do it from our operating surplus, but one of the things because if you borrowed for a capital project, should you be using your depreciation, and should the loan repayments come out of that? Otherwise, basically, it restricts your ability to borrow funds because you've got to raise rates to cover the loan repayments pretty much.
Yeah, you need to be able to fit your loan repayments. And I think the way we look at, I look at our cash balance and see what cash we have. So when you're pulling your budget together, you really need to focus on what are those cash funds that you're going to have in the model that you're using. And it's effectively your surplus should be what's paying for any loan repayments. So, and in a rate capped environment, our surpluses are going to, over time, get less and less. So it will be challenging.
Yeah, it's going to basically mean you can't borrow because you won't be able to fund the loan repayments. It'll be very difficult to.
That's right. The loans are going to be, the opportunity to borrow will be less unless you've got something that's got a particular return on investment, and that return on investment will help to fund those loan repayments. So certainly at Wodonga, one project we're looking at, we're renting our depot area. We've got a rental agreement. We've factored in an option to buy. We were looking at building. It was going to cost us, we've got the land, it was going to cost us 11 million to build. We can buy the premises where we are for about $6.5 million. So we have an option on that. The return on investment, when I calculated it out last year, it didn't get across the line, but it was up over 7%. In the current environment with rates coming down further, you know, that's a really big return on investment, and the saved rent will actually cover the loan repayments. So there will be opportunities on the right projects where you absolutely can cost and fund those loan repayments, but not everyone will create that. If you're building a new road, you're going to have a surplus to fund loans to build a new road. But yeah, if you've got a return on investment, they're the ones you look at for borrowing.
Thanks, Narelle. And Mark, thanks very much for those questions. Can I just hold it there? And Charles, sorry, we've run out of time. And I'm going to cut us off here because people are dropping away, obviously got other commitments. So we can tell you now that we're planning another session on Feb budgets in Feb. In fact, we're looking for, our panel today has done a fantastic job, and we'd certainly give them an opportunity to come back in Feb to talk about how they've progressed in that time. But we'd also like to invite anyone else who might be interested in coming on to that panel, being on the panel in Feb, because it's been a fantastic insight into what councils are doing now, and in what is going to be the 1 year out of the odd year out of many in terms of COVID recovery. So thank you very much. And look, please, if you're interested in going on that panel in Feb, please email Gabriel, and we'd be looking to put another session together, which I think will be around about the time that the model budget and model accounts come out too. So guys, just on behalf of the FinPro committee and the members, I'd like to thank Charles, Alan, Narelle and Dennis for their input today and taking time out of their busy schedules to prepare that stuff today. And like to wish everyone good luck with your projects and budgets over the next couple of months. And please stay tuned. Look, if you've got some more questions, please send them to Gabriel, and we'll try and put something in the next newsletter in terms of responses for those. So guys, thank you very much. It's been a great session, and we'll see you next time.